Again, before we get to today's content, I'd like to bring to your awareness the Proclaim and Serve Missions Conference that Harvest Call is organizing and hosting this July 19th and 20th. The event will be held at our Roanoke Apostolic Christian Church, and you can go to the website at harvestcall.org to sign up. The event will begin on Friday evening and then continue all day Saturday. And now to today's episode.
It's a great opportunity for us as parents to know our children, right? And to know what their good days look like, but that we also know what their rough days look like. And that we know them that well, that when some of these trauma triggers or red flags start popping up, and that's a good time just to, I'm just going to do a check-in here, and open up the door with our kids.
Welcome back, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. In the studio today, I've got Brian Sutter and Craig Stickling. Great to have you guys here.
Great to be here, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
A lot of times when you guys team up, our conversation regards children and regards parenting and that type of aspect. And today's no different. But we're going to talk about a very delicate topic, and a lot of our topics are delicate, but I don't know. At the moment, this seems most delicate of all.
Sure.
And that's trauma as it intersects with children.
Trauma can look a lot of different ways. It can come from a lot of different sources, and therefore can make it a little bit difficult to say this was a trauma, or, as a parent or as a caretaker, that you could miss it easy enough because it can look a lot of different ways and come from a lot of different places.
Yeah. And just even to recap, Ted unpacked trauma, so we're not going to replow all of that ground, but what I learned out of that conversation is trauma stems from an event, something that really happened, and that event still is carried along in life. And so even though it was in the past, it's very much present. It's very much impactful in the psyche of an individual.
As an adult with lots of experiences and years, I can process an event that's happened and be able to see the bigger picture. Whereas a little 3-year-old or 5-year-old or 7-year-old brain, they haven't had those experiences of how to process something.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you an example. I do remember being first grade, maybe, and became aware of a classmate whose parents separated, divorced. And that really put me in a bit of a tailspin.
Sure.
I was afraid all of a sudden my world got opened up to a possibility I'd never even fathomed before. And I kind of languished a bit in this fear until finally my mom perceived it, and we were to have a conversation about it, and she was able to settle my heart on that issue. Now, I'm not sure that was necessarily trauma, but to your point, Craig, that we miss it as adults.
Sure. Yeah. And in that, sometimes as a child, you don't even have the wherewithal to bring that to mom or dad. You're just trying to sort through it in your own mind, and you don't realize, boy, mom or dad or others may have some wisdom to pour into this. And from that perspective, I think there's even a difference between trauma, like you experiencing a traumatic event, and then the diagnosis of PTSD, where, sometimes parents being able to just provide good sound teaching in the midst of a trauma can be very helpful then to prevent moving on into what we would call PTSD, and can be quite helpful with just some pretty basic information.
Yeah, so that PTSD is basically that existence of the trauma continually being alive throughout time.
That's right.
And you're saying that a parent can, or an authority figure often, if they're aware of that in the young person's life, can really stop that and say, no, that's an event and that's all that it is.
Right, particularly if it's a smaller thing.
Yes.
Certainly there's going to be big T kind of traumas that are just overwhelming the system, and it's going to be more than just some information in that. But a lot of things, you can just be talking through and helping them sort through it so their little minds don't put a meaning on it that isn't accurate.
Yeah.
That trauma gets almost like a little videotape that gets played every single day over and over and over. And even though we are moving on as the adults, that little child's brain is still stuck, and that gets played over and over. And there'll be little triggers that will flash that memory back or remind them
or
of
reignite that fear.
That over and over and over. So they're never getting comfortable or feeling a sense of safety and trust again. to be able to talk through or process that.
So you said safety. That was one of the big ahas that I had with Ted when I talked to him about trauma, is I came to this understanding that trauma very much orbits closely to safety. When safety is breached, then you're teed up for a traumatic event, right? Yep.
And
so now we look at children who are the most vulnerable among us, right? So if you think about them, if they've got a safety barometer, it would be much more cued than mine would be.
Right. You can see how the perception of either themselves or their perception of others or the perception of the world around them can turn into everything's dangerous when it comes to others or the world, or me, I'm bad, and where safety can help speak into that. No, bad things can happen. Other people do bad things, but there are safe places, there are safe people, and that's particularly hard to sort through when people who are supposed to be safe have maybe been the perpetrator, and then a lot of times you'll see the child taking it on as their, this must have been my fault, and again, that just breaks down that whole sense of safety.
Okay, we're going to go there. You just mentioned a big T trauma, right, where the perpetrator, right, is somebody close to them. Yeah. We're going to come back to that.
Okay.
But something that you mentioned there, helping them process the insecurities of our world. Now, Craig, I have been in conversations with you where you've helped me understand that this youngest generation have got a lot of fears, particularly around safety these days. Share that with our listeners. Help us understand their world.
Well, you think of our world just a few generations ago, right? Our world was limited to, our house and what we could see out the window, to our neighborhood, and our world was pretty contained in that. One of the marvels of technology is that kids get to see so much, so many places. And I remember when 9/11, when that occurred, I remember I was working in a school at that time, and I remember we had to do so much follow-up because those kids, every time they saw that on the news, repeated in the news, their brain was thinking that that was happening again. They weren't processing this was a repeated event.
Interesting.
They saw it as, oh no, another building's coming down, another building's coming down, another building. And so their sense of safety and security it's just a different game for them.
So that's a classic example, Craig, that they're taking in the same media and information that we are, but unable to process exactly what the meaning of it is.
Overexposure to all of the bad things in the world, it tees you up for already being prone when something bad confirms, oh no, the world really isn't safe.
So the point that you are making really is this youngest generation, our children, are growing up in an insecure world, a not very safe world, and they kind of know it.
Yeah.
And that tees up some trauma.
The perception is that, wow, it is a bad place out there, and people just want to kill you or hurt you.
So if we go into this, larger T trauma area, certainly this impacts the psyche, the development in some level. And I would maybe venture a guess that there would be some outward signs that perhaps some trauma has occurred.
Yeah. And I think that would be just one of the things for parents to be aware of, that you're not always going to be aware that a trauma's happened. You may not even be, you won't be able to always even prevent, but you can be aware of their behavior. And if you're noticing significant shifts, whether that's outwardly like aggression or in their play, especially for young kids, if they're, having particularly aggressive play, or they seem to be acting out a scene over and over, regression in like potty training, for example, or other kinds of behaviors, you expect that to ebb and flow over time for kids. But if you see it and it feels more extreme or it's kind of persistent, that certainly would be a cue that, there's something going on, and maybe I ought to talk to them and wonder if something's bothering them.
So is that your lead-in? Honey, is there something bothering you?
Yeah, or I've noticed, or it seems like all of a sudden sleep is really difficult. Again, in that, 5, 6, 7 age range, when their brains are developing, you're going to expect them to start having nightmares, that's part of development.
Right.
So you have to be careful of that. But yeah, to notice, are you doing okay? Is something bothering you? Those sorts of things.
Yep.
And open up the door with our kids. And it doesn't have to be the 20 questions, but it can be just a couple letting them know, hey, just wondering, notice some things, and open up the door for them, letting them know that we are wanting to talk about where they're at.
And it's important probably not to jump to conclusions.
Right.
Let's be a little bit more specific when it comes to treatment, right? When it comes to engaging a child with trauma, what does it look like to walk them out of it?
Well, I think the first thing is what do I need to do to make sure that my child is safe today? That's the first step.
Yeah. But then there's follow-up. There's other additional things that can be done as well for the continued treatment and health of that person. What's the routines? Let's get back. Let's create some routines that are just very structured and steadfast, trying to minimize, if possible, the stress at the home. Looking in our own mirror of our own lives. Am I stressed out all the time? Am I bringing that to the place? Speaking of making future plans, giving our kids something that we're planning in the future for, creating that hope. And with that piece of making plans, as mom and dads, we can make, we're going to do this, but then we don't. But for kids that are still in their trauma cycle, we need to make sure that we're keeping our promises. If we tell them we're going to do something, hey, next Saturday, we're going to go to the zoo, okay? We need to make sure that we follow through on that.
That's good.
Yeah,
Brian, what thoughts do you have?
Yeah, just to go along with some of that, I think one of the things to think about is for parents not to always push to talk more about whatever happened, but also not to avoid. It seems like you can pretty easily fall into either of those extremes, and really I think our goal would be to be a safe place that they can come to, that every once in a while we are checking in and asking questions, but we're not just assuming everything is revolving around that, nor are we just avoiding and assuming everything's fine. So I think those would certainly be pieces. And then in that, let's say you get going and you're not really sure what to do next, I think to reach out and get extra support, whether that's, if they're in the public school and talking with leadership in the school, that's a good option. Or if that's calling us or another family that's maybe walked through something similar or other local counseling, I think those would certainly be good things. Another piece that comes to mind is just in a lot of situations, we just need to give good, solid information to kids. That if X happens, let's say we go back to 9/11, like telling them what happened and giving them the information, the facts, is a wise thing. Generally speaking, they're going to kind of run in their imaginations probably to places that would be even worse, like in that example, and just them having an idea of what happened so they can sort through it can be pretty helpful.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense because they've got a script being written in their head about how they're processing, and that contributes, I would guess, to the trauma that they experience.
Right.
It's that script that's running.
Exactly.
And so if the script is in error,
right,
well, then we can help rewrite that script.
And that process will take time.
Is it important for parents to be able to separate the reason why things happened and that they happened? Okay, so let me give you this as a setup. Now I'm thinking of a teenager, falls prey to some sexual abuse. And then when the parents unpack that, they find that she made unwise decisions. And so why did you do this and why did you do that becomes the fodder of conversation,
right,
as opposed to caring for her.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's so hard, I think, sometimes as parents that in our exasperation, we fight the wrong battles.
Yeah, exactly. And we take the position sometimes of accidentally reinforcing some of trauma's really painful messages, such as, this is your fault. And instead, I think we have to start by connecting and realizing the depth of hurt that happens in this kind of a situation and just being a place where there's love and nurture and care. I think we have to start there, and sometimes that can be tricky in a situation like you're describing.
Yeah.
Connect first. If there's a place for teaching and instruction, that will come. But our natural bent, I think, a lot of times is to start with instruction. And then if that connection piece isn't in place, the instruction isn't able to be received, or it comes in the wrong spirit, and then it becomes something that can backfire.
Right. I think part of it, and I almost wonder if there's a mindset here that we as parents need to have. I want to protect my children from trauma at all costs. I want no trauma in the life of my children. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, is that a pretty tough thing to manage?
I'd say impossible. I mean, it's a good desire.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be, because if I have that as my thought process and I find out my child has been traumatized, then the wheels start to come off of if there's such a thing as a parenting worldview. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think then I start to ask the wrong questions and go about things perhaps in the wrong way. So I want you to rewrite my parenting worldview on trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess what I would say there is just that to recognize that it is our jobs to point them towards Christ, to come alongside, to be a place of safety, a place of love, a place of good, sound, wise teaching, and in that, living in a fallen world where there's brokenness in ourselves and other people and even in just the world at large, bad things will happen, and we want to have in our own selves, but also our kids, the integrity and the ability to have some skills to walk through those bad things, whatever they are. Hopefully they won't be the things that we're talking about, but the reality that we don't have as much control as we would love as parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And to be reminded that as parents, we're going to be human too, right? And we could be consumed with that worry and doubt and fear, and yet we're not asked to live in a spirit of fear. If something happens and we have to deal with something, sometimes we need a little bit of our time to just get together and process and to talk through and work through our emotions before we then address head-on with our kids where we're at.
Yeah, I'd like to unpack and maybe synthesize a little bit what I'm hearing here about this parental worldview. We have a worldview that we live in a broken world, and that perhaps our objective is not to get through this world unscathed, but our objective is to deal with the scathing we're getting.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I think there's a world of difference there. I'm not sure my child who stumbles across a pornography website is going to want to talk to me about it. With the other one, maybe more apt to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we talk about dealing with trauma, we're basically processing that event. Is that right? Is that a great way to think about it?
Yeah, and I would say there's a couple different pieces. So that's one piece. There may be needing to kind of process the past event and kind of bring some helpful meaning to it. So that's one piece. And then the other piece, I think, is living in the present moment with right perception of the present moment.
Right.
And sometimes those are independent of each other.
Right.
So it's not necessarily just going into the past and reshaping that. It's also like, how do I bring into this sense now that even though I feel really scared, this present moment is okay, and reprocessing that perception. That's ultimately what you want to get to.
I'm going to give an example and see if I can hit both of these things. Mm-hmm. Let's take that pornography exposure. Okay. Right? They're playing with the iPad. Off they go. It can happen so quickly, right? They're exposed in a really hurtful way, in a formative way. So one thing, if that were to come out, you can process that event, help them feel at peace about it as best you can, right? Bring perspective about what they saw. But then there's okay, now that you've lost that innocence, now we have to walk with you with that information. We can't simply say, all right, we're back to where we were before, even if the trauma has been processed. We're a different person post-trauma. Mm-hmm. And now how do we best walk with that information? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm hitting on that.
Yeah.
Clear it up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, I think. And so in the moment, you're helping them see themselves rightly in the context that X has happened in the past. How does that impact who they are today and the information they have now? How do they sort through that in a way that's helpful and allows them to engage the present moment underneath God's law and authority?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that.
And things in life will have the opportunity to refine us, but there'll also be things that might happen where, especially when Satan wants to get involved, that he'll want us to just to be defined by it. Get to call me this. I'm defined by this forever.
Yeah, I'm marked.
I think one of the unique things with maybe trauma is that it might be present, but then it might just go below the surface, and then it might appear that it's gone, and our kids, we're fine, we're good, and then it might come back again, and it might go, and so it's moving this to the surface, then below the surface, and so sometimes with trauma, it's not something that a Band-Aid takes care of. It could be something that really goes on for a while that takes some extra effort.
So, Craig, what I'm hearing here, though, too, is it possible for us to see that, okay, this has been processed, and it's behind them, when perhaps it's not. It could surface later. Yeah. Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do their behaviors kind of more withdrawn, or it's internally, it's really easy to think everything's okay when the battle continues to kind of roar inside and you don't know it. And you can kind of just say, oh, they're a little quieter, they seem a little bit more withdrawn, but yeah, they seem to be going really good. I think, the tornado happened, but everybody's moved on and we're in a good space, we're in a new place. And it maybe looks like that, but nobody's really talked to them and really getting a picture of where they're currently at.
And to help them know what feeling right or healthy thinking again, what that looks like again. Because remember, in that loss of safety and security, all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't necessarily know what to think anymore. And I'm told that things are fine, so okay, I guess I need to be fine, but I don't know what that picture is. And for us speaking into that.
I think another thing that comes to mind there, Craig, too, would be, let's say, for example, if somebody's been sexually abused and that kind of a trauma, as they work through developmental stages, even if they've had some really good healing to the initial trauma, let's say they're moving through puberty now. Like that's going to bring something else, maybe a new piece to that or another level that would be, even though, there's been some good processing and work, that it may need to be revisited again, as something like that would happen.
Yeah, tying on to that, something I see a lot and the school systems is when kids will come and they'll talk about that mom and dad have divorced and they've separated or that they're getting a divorce, and our culture has normalized almost that's not it's almost a non-event anymore. Unfortunate, but it's really a non-event. But in most kids, it's not a non-event, and that is something that kids will have to process the elements of that. For as each developmental stage comes, they will have to reprocess or go through a reprocessing of that again.
Okay, so now that's interesting. That brings up, I think, a unique aspect of trauma in children, and that is, or they be traumatized by the collateral damage of somebody else's trauma. Does that make sense? So, the divorce is a perfect example of that, where it's outside of them, it's affecting them, and sometimes we might think it shouldn't affect them as much as it does. Right. And I'm sure the examples are vast in the sense that we as parents might be enduring something and not realize the fallout. Could it be because we are consumed in it ourselves? Does that make sense?
Sure.
I know the phrase that probably hurts most kids the most in those situations is, we've talked about this, you should be over this by now. And as an adult, I can rationalize that pretty well. But to a 7-year-old or 12-year-old or whatever, it's not about you should be over this, but I'm noticing that you're still having a hard time. Talk to me about what's going on and how can I help?
So it's not in our place as adults to say that shouldn't be traumatic. I think is really what you're saying. Okay, now there's a reality I would like you brothers to speak to. This is maybe more on the larger T trauma. Wonderfully, the gospel says Christ makes all things new. A tremendous amount of resolve in that, right? And it would seem that sometimes he does for some and sometimes he doesn't for others. Okay, now that's my outside looking in, right?
Yeah.
Take two people who's endured a great deal of trauma and becoming a Christian, becoming a new creature, seems to process all of that as deep and dark as it was. And yet another one repents and languishes and then wonders.
It's a really hard spot to speak into, but I think there's no question that if you just look around and interact with enough people, that you'll see that coming to Christ in faith, while it brings spiritual life, it doesn't heal all the emotional or physical wounds that happen prior to that.
That verse of all things new, I don't have to be the author of what that looks like. My Heavenly Father authors that. How can I take this and bring glory to God?
I really like that. God authors what the newness looks like, but we like to take that authorship ourselves. So that's very good.
And that God is patient and His love is patient. This restoration coming through a trauma, that sometimes it takes some patience with that. And that just sometimes takes some time.
And this is one of just the great messages of the Bible. The Christian worldview is in that there's always hope. There's hope for restoration. And one of the things I'm constantly amazed about is how resilient God has made children. So I think that's another piece of the puzzle, that they're not nearly as fragile as what we can think they are sometimes. Now, again, we want to keep them from big things, but they are amazingly resilient, praise God.
Has that been your experience too, Craig? You've worked with a lot of kids.
You know, there's a tendency, yes, they could be traumatized easier, but they can also recover easier or quicker or faster, right? So they're sponges and they love to learn. They love to know what to do, and that we get to be that agent for helping them know how to get through this, right?
Yeah.
And what a great message as God is like, He gives us the Holy Spirit to get through. How do we manage? How do we deal? How do we survive? And we also then get to relay that message to our kids. You're not out here on your own. We're in this together. And to get to walk through those hard times with our children.
Craig and Brian, thank you. I wish it wasn't anybody's reality. But for reasons you've mentioned in our broken world, it is. And so the help that's been provided to help process for us, just to think through it, to guide us as parents so we think rightly about our children and their experiences and how to step into this, how we can best protect them, how we can have their safety close at our heart and be thoughtful about their safety on a number of levels, not only physically, but emotionally, and all of those, I think, has been really, really helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
To our listeners, we're thankful for you to be here. And no doubt this has resonated on a number of levels with you. And we trust and pray that it's sent you in the right direction. Ultimately, that direction is towards Christ and the gospel and His healing and His purpose. And we're thankful most of all for Him, aren't we? So thanks for being here.